Hi, everyone. Welcome again to the series of lectures on civil procedure. Our topic for today is preliminary injunction under Rule 58. As you all know, preliminary injunction is one of the provisional remedies that can be availed of by a party to ensure that his rights are protected pending the resolution or determination of the main case. And it is also important to note in the inception that injunction is a main action. It is also a main case as well as a provisional relief. If it is preliminary, it is the provisional relief that a party can ask to protect his rights pending the trial. Permanent injunction is the injunction that is issued by the court in the event that the court finds that he is entitled to the relief prayed for permanently. Okay. So what is preliminary injunction? Under Section 1 of Rule 58, it is defined as one that is granted at any stage of an action. It is a provisional remedy granted at any stage of an action or proceeding prior to judgment or final order, requiring a party or a court agency or person to refrain from a particular act, or it may require the performance of a particular act. So as you can see, injunction may be prohibitory, it may also be mandatory. So if it directs a person to cease from the performance of an act, it is prohibitory. If it commands the performance of an act, it is mandatory. Okay? Now, who are the persons who may grant a preliminary injunction? It may be granted by the trial court where the action is pending, may be granted also by the Court of Appeals or the Supreme Court. Okay? Preliminary injunction as a main action is incapable of pecuniary estimation. So it is within the jurisdiction of the RTC. However, the Court of Appeals, in aid of its appellate jurisdiction, can also issue injunctions as well as the Supreme Court. Now, what are the requirements or the requisites before an injunction may issue? The first and very important requirement is the right in esse. So what is a right in esse? It is a clear legal right to the relief prayed for. If your case is anchored on a right which is contingent or which is doubtful, you have no you're not entitled to a preliminary injunction, much less a permanent injunction. Okay, because Section 3 of Rule 58 states that the applicant is entitled to the relief demanded, and the whole or part of such relief consists in restraining the commission or continuance of the acts complained of or in requiring the performance of an act. Second requirement is that the commission or continuance or non-performance of the act or acts complained of would probably work injustice to the applicant. So the requirement of irreparable damage. Okay? So if the act will continue and not restrained, or if you will not command the performance of an act, the result would be irreparable damage to the applicant. Okay, and then the third requirement that a party, court, or agency or a person is doing threatening or is attempting to do or is procuring or suffering to be done some acts probably in violation of the rights of the applicant respecting the subject of the action and tending to render the judgment ineffectual. Okay, so those three must be present for the applicant to be entitled to the provisional relief of preliminary injunction. Okay. Now, what are the formal requirements before preliminary injunction may issue or a TRO? Okay. First, you file a verified application showing the facts entitling the applicant to the relief demanded. So the requirements for an injunction, which was mentioned in Section 3, must be contained in the verified application. Okay. Aside from the application showing your entitlement to the injunction, you have to file a bond. Okay, unless of course you're exempted by the court. Okay, that bond is executed to the adverse party to answer for any damages that may be caused to the defendant by reason of the issuance of the injunction, because the defendant will be restrained or the defendant will be compelled to do an act. So if there are damages, if for example later the court finds that you're not entitled to the injunction, then that bond will answer for those damages. Okay. The application for TRO shall be acted upon only after the parties are heard in a summary hearing, which shall be conducted within 24 hours after the sheriff's return. Okay. Section 5 of the rules state that no preliminary injunction shall be granted without a hearing and prior notice to the party or person sought to be enjoined. Unless great or irreparable injury would result to the applicant before the matter can be heard on notice. Okay. As a general rule, okay, you cannot issue uh, a preliminary injunction without first a notice and a hearing. So, notice to the defendant that there is an application for a TRO. Okay, and summary hearing conducted for the purpose of ensuring that the applicant is really entitled to the TRO and to give also the defendant the opportunity to oppose the issuance of the TRO or the injunction. Okay, however, if there is there is evidence, if the great or irreparable injury would result to the applicant before the matter can be heard or notice, then if great or irreparable injury would result to the applicant before the matter can be heard on notice, upon filing of the TRO and before raffle, the executive judge can issue a TRO effective for only 72 hours. Okay, during that 72-hour period, the case should be raffled and the presiding judge of the court where the same is raffled may, in his or her discretion, issue an ex parte temporary restraining order effective only for a period of 20 days inclusive of the 72 hours TRO issued by the executive judge. Okay? Now, during the said 20-day period, the said judge, where the case is raffled, should issue the summons, the notice of the application for TRO, and set it for hearing, for summary hearing. Okay, to determine whether or not the applicant is really qualified for the issuance of a preliminary injunction. Okay, now, if during the 20-day period, if the 20-day period expires without the said TRO being extended because extension is not allowed, then the TRO expires ipso facto, automatically. Okay? And the order of cessation of the doing of an act or the requirement for the doing of an act will also cease. Okay. Now, can there be can a preliminary injunction, can a case for injunction be dismissed without conducting a hearing? Yes. The only requirement for notice and hearing applies only for the granting of a preliminary injunction. But if it is for the denial of a preliminary injunction, then the same does not require a hearing. Okay? For the Court of Appeals, if the Court of Appeals issues a TRO, the effectivity of the TRO shall be for a period of 60 days. Okay? On the other hand, if it is the Supreme Court which issued the TRO, it shall be effective until further orders from the High Court. Again, it is important to note that a writ of preliminary injunction is an extraordinary event which must be granted only in the face of actual and existing substantial rights. It is classified as a strong arm of equity or a transcendent remedy. Thus, it must be exercised sparingly with utmost care and caution and deliberation. So, TRO is not lightly issued, much less a writ of preliminary injunction. All the requisites must be there in order to justify its issuance. Right in esse, irreparable damage, and the requirement for the issuance of the posting of a bond. Okay? The duty of the court is to determine whether the requisites necessary for the grant are present. The main action for injunction seeks a judgment embodying a final injunction, which is distinct from the provisional remedy, which I already emphasized at the outset. The sole object is to preserve the status quo until the merits of the case can be heard. That is the essence of a provisional remedy, to ensure that a judgment will be effectively implemented, effectively and successfully implemented, that it will not be an empty victory. Okay, let us go to the case of Bacolod City Water District versus Labayen. Okay, so in the case of Bacolod City Water District, the city filed a case for injunction with prayer for TRO against the petitioner who announced the implementation of its water fares adjustment. Now, the issue is whether the order was a TRO or a preliminary injunction. So in this case, the court distinguish what is a TRO from a preliminary injunction. The main action for injunction is distinct from the provisional remedy of preliminary injunction, which cannot exist except only in so far as part of an incident of an independent action. The main action for injunction seeks a judgment embodying a final injunction, which is distinct from and should not be confused with the provisional remedy of preliminary injunction, the sole object of which, as I have said earlier, is the preservation of the status quo until the merits of the case can be heard. Okay, a restraining order is issued to preserve the status quo pending the hearing of the application for preliminary injunction, which cannot be issued ex parte. So you must remember, okay, that a preliminary injunction cannot be issued ex parte. Only a TRO can be issued ex parte, either by the executive judge for the 72 hours TRO or the presiding judge for the 20-day TRO. The purpose of which is to preserve the status quo until the merits of the case can be heard. And also, for the issuance of the said TRO, the grave and irreparable damage is an essential requirement. So irreparable damage will be caused to the applicant until if the pending the hearing of the case. Okay? In this case, since no preliminary injunction was issued, the TRO automatically expired after 20 days. That is what is called the sunset clause. Okay? If the TRO, if a preliminary injunction is not granted, okay, and the 20-day TRO has expired, the TRO ceases to be effective automatically. Okay? Um, the purpose for the 20-day TRO is to provide the court with a period. Okay? So that the court can issue summons to the defendant, set a hearing for the purpose of determining the qualification or entitlement of the applicant to a preliminary injunction. Okay? So the rule against the non-extendibility of the 20-day limited period of effectivity is absolute if issued by the RTC. The failure of the respondent court to fix a period for the ordered restraint did not lend the TRO a breadth of semi-permanence, which can only be characteristic of a preliminary injunction. We have the case of Pahila versus Totobo. So the issue in this case is whether the RTC lawfully issued the TRO and the writ of prohibitory injunction to enjoin the execution of the already final and executory decision of the first level court. The Supreme Court said that the RTC was guilty of grave abuse of discretion in issuing the TRO and the writ of injunction to restrain the execution of a final and executory decision of the first level court because of the principle of immutability of final judgment, that once a judgment has become final, it becomes cast in stone and it could not be anymore modified. They could not anymore be permitted to interminably forestall the execution of judgment through their interposition of new petitions or pleadings. Injunction, being a preservative remedy for the protection of rights and interests, is not a cause of action in itself, but merely a provisional remedy, an adjunct to a main suit. It is resorted to only when there is a pressing necessity to avoid injurious consequences that cannot be redressed under any standard of compensation. A writ of preliminary injunction is an extraordinary event. It is a strong arm of equity. It is granted only to protect actual and existing substantial rights. Without actual and existing rights on the part of the applicant, and in the absence of facts bringing the matter within the condition for its issuance, the auxiliary writ must be struck down for being issued with grave abuse of discretion. Thus, injunction will not issue to protect a right not in esse, which is merely contingent and which may never arise, to restrain an act which does not give rise to a cause of action. So remember, right in esse is the foremost requirement of an injunction. If you do not have a right in esse, a clear legal right, then you're not entitled to the provisional remedy of injunction. In this case, the decision was already final and executory, and the applicant wants to restrain the enforcement of that decision through an injunction, which was not allowed by the court because, okay, he has no clear legal right. It was the defendant who has a clear legal right to the implementation of the decision. Here, the respondents did not establish the existence of an actual right protected by injunction. They did not begin with hold any enforcement of the property, subject matter of the MTCC decision, and the writ of execution. The memoranda and investigative report whereby the DENR appeared to classify the property as foreshore land conferred upon the respondents no interest or right in the land. The classification was not a supervening event that entitled them to the protection of injunctive relief. Their claim to any right as of then was merely contingent and was something that might not even arise in the future. We further note that the RTC judge expressly made the TRO effective until further orders from him. So you must remember that if it is issued by the trial court, the effectivity of the TRO is only for a limited period of 20 days. Okay? Yet by making the TRO effective until further orders, he made the effectivity of the TRO indefinite. He thus took for granted the caution that injunction as the strong arm of equity should not be routinely or lightly granted. We have the case of Buico versus Barakia. Barakia filed before the RTC a complaint against Buico for the establishment of a permanent right-of-way, injunction, and damages to enjoin the Buicos from closing off a private road within their property which has been using to go to and from the public highway to access his poultry farm. The issue is whether the lifting of a writ of preliminary injunction due to the dismissal of the complaint is immediately executory, even if the dismissal of the complaint is pending appeal. Okay? The writ is provisional because it constitutes a temporary measure availed of during the pendency of the action. It is ancillary because it is a mere incident in and is dependent upon the result of the main action. It is well settled that the sole object of a preliminary injunction is to preserve the status quo until the merits of the case can be heard. The present case having been heard and found dismissible, as in fact it was dismissed, the writ of preliminary injunction is deemed lifted. Its purpose as a provisional remedy having been served, the appeal therefrom notwithstanding. So, just like in all the other provisional remedies, since preliminary injunction is only a provisional remedy, once the main case is dismissed, its purpose have already been served because its purpose is to preserve the status quo until the merits of the case can be heard. So if the case is dismissed, the preliminary injunction is automatically lifted, it being merely an ancillary remedy, even if the dismissal of the case is still pending appeal. Okay? Even in cases when an appeal is taken from a judgment dismissing an action, the appeal does not suspend the judgment. Hence, the general rule applies that a temporary injunction terminates automatically upon dismissal of the action. Okay, we have already discussed the requirements for the issuance of a preliminary injunction, right in esse, irreparable damage, and filing of an injunction bond. Okay? UE versus Wong. So in this case, the parties entered into several contracts of lease, okay, of various canteen spaces within the campus of UP. Now, the contract is about to expire on December 31, 1999. Now, a year before the expiry of the contract, there was some meeting. And according to the respondent, the petitioner verbally assured her that the contracts would be renewed. Okay? Respondent now filed with the RTC a petition, an application for mandatory injunction, alleging that the non-renewal of the lease contract would cause irreparable injury to him. The UE was saying that there was no commitment for the renewal of the said lease contract. So the main issue is the propriety of the writ of preliminary injunction issued by the trial court. The Supreme Court held that there is no evidence that petitioner ever agreed to the 2-year extension being sought by the respondent. That respondent was apparently using the judicial process to circumvent her obligation to pay the rentals due from her. So it must be emphasized again that the existence of a clear legal right is the very essence of the entitlement to the issuance of a preliminary injunction. So in this case, the verbal assurance for the renewal of the lease contract, which was consistently denied by the petitioner is not a clear legal right that can be the basis for the issuance of an injunction. Okay, we have already discussed the effectivity of a TRO. A TRO is issued, okay, may be issued upon the filing of a case, okay, 72 hours to be issued by the executive judge if the EJ finds that there is a need for the issuance of a TRO. Otherwise, great irreparable damage will result to the applicant before the matter can be heard um, in the uh, in the sala where the case will be ultimately raffled. Okay? And then 20-day TRO ex parte to be issued by the presiding judge where the case is raffled. During the said 20-day period, including the 72 hours, issued by the EJ, the case will be heard in a summary hearing to determine the entitlement of the applicant to a preliminary injunction. A preliminary injunction cannot be issued without notice and hearing. It is only a TRO which can be issued ex parte. Now, if the 20-day TRO expires without the court issuing a preliminary injunction, then the TRO automatically expires. Okay? The preliminary injunction is effective during the pendency of the case until further orders from the court. Okay? Uh, an application for writ of preliminary injunction, again, may be denied without the conduct of a hearing. The rule simply requires the conduct of a hearing before the writ is granted. When such application is denied, the requisite of hearing does not apply. Crisologo versus Omelio. Writs of preliminary injunction shall only be issued with hearing and prior notice to the party or person sought to be enjoined. Should great or irreparable injury result to the applicant based on affidavits or the verified application before the matter can be heard, the court may issue a TRO effective for a period of 20 days. So, to the point of being repetitive, writ of preliminary injunction will not issue unless there is notice and hearing. So in the hearing, there was no presentation of witnesses to substantiate the allegations. Without testimonial and documentary evidence, the investigating justice deemed the applicant of injunctive writ to have failed to establish a clear and unmistakable right. However, the Supreme Court disagreed. Although the general rule is that a sampling of evidence is required to be submitted during the hearing on the motion for preliminary injunction, there are also instances when an injunction can be issued based on the verified application, provided there is notice and hearing. A TRO is issued not only based on the affidavit, but also based on the verified application and its supporting documents, provided there is notice and hearing. With no factual issues, the issues raised by the counsels were purely legal, which could be resolved from an examination of the verified application and its supporting documents. A clear and unmistakable right to the issuance of the writ of injunction could easily be gathered from examining the submitted pleadings. The judge already received documentary evidences as supporting documents in the verified application and accorded both counsels the opportunity to be heard in oral arguments before him during the hearing. So, to support the issuance of a preliminary injunction, it is not required that the judge conduct a full-blown hearing. The hearing is summary in nature. It will require a sampling of the evidence of the parties. Okay? The full-blown hearing will be conducted in the trial of the main case for injunction. But for the purpose of the issuance of a preliminary injunction, it is sufficient that the parties are given opportunities to be heard in a hearing and to present a sampling of their respective evidences. Okay, EBI construction versus Valiant Roll Forming Sales. So in this case, The petitioner claims that it was denied. The issue is whether or not EBI Construction was denied due process in their application for the writ of preliminary injunction was denied. Okay, petitioner claims that it was denied due process because there was no valid hearing for the application, and it was not even allowed to present its summary arguments and witnesses in support of its application. However, the Supreme Court said that while Rule 58, Section 4 requires the trial court to conduct a summary hearing in every application for TRO, regardless of the grant or denial, Rule 58, Section 5 requires a hearing only if an application for preliminary injunction is granted. So in this case, the hearing was denominated as a hearing on the application for TRO and preliminary injunction. Petitioner's counsel was allowed to present its arguments and its witness, but conceded that the issues before the trial court were legal. Thus, the trial court resolved that there was no need to present the witness, which petitioner's counsel accepted without objection. The trial court did not find any need to conduct further hearing on the application for injunction since petitioner was unable to substantiate its entitlement to a TRO. The issuance of a writ of preliminary injunction is considered an extraordinary event, being a strong arm of equity. An injuncted writ is granted only to applicants with actual and existing substantial right or right in esse. Further, the applicant must show that the invasion of the right is material and substantial and that there is an urgent and paramount necessity for the writ. Thus, the writ will not issue to applicants whose rights are merely contingent or to compel or restrain acts that do not give rise to a cause of action. Thus, no injunctive writ could be issued pending a final determination of the petitioner's actual and existing right over the property. The grant of an injunctive writ could operate as a prejudgment of the main case. We have the case of First Sarmiento versus PBCom. Okay. First Sarmiento speaks of the different types of TRO. So the 72-hour TRO issued by the EJ and the 20-day TRO which is inclusive of the 72 hours TRO issued by the executive judge. In the event that the application for injunction is denied or not resolved within the said period, the TRO is then automatically vacated. The effectivity of a TRO is not extendable without need of any judicial declaration. No court shall have the authority to extend or renew the same on the same ground for which it was issued. Okay? Because during the 20-day period, the court would have to conduct a summary hearing to determine whether or not a preliminary injunction should be issued. If no preliminary injunction is issued, then the TRO, which was previously issued ex parte, is automatically vacated. Okay? As I have said, the TRO, both TRO, those issued by the EJ and the presiding, both of them may be issued ex parte. If the application for injunction is denied or not resolved within the given period, the TRO is automatically vacated and the court has no authority to extend or renew the same. Despite the clear wording of the rules, the RTC issued an order indefinitely extending the TRO. Petitioner applied for a writ of preliminary injunction, yet the RTC did not conduct any hearing for that purpose and merely directed the parties to observe the status quo ante. The basic purpose of a restraining order is to preserve the status quo until the hearing of the application for a preliminary injunction. A TRO cannot be extended indefinitely to take the place of a writ of preliminary injunction since the TRO is extended only to have a limited lifespan and is deemed automatically vacated upon the expiration of the 72 hours or 20 days as the case may be. This court has repeatedly expounded on the nature of a TRO and a preliminary injunction, yet lower courts consistently interchange these ancillary remedies and disregard the sunset clause inherent in a TRO by erroneously extending it indefinitely. Okay? Pahe versus Ganaban. In this case, the Supreme Court again reiterated the requisites for the issuance of an injunction. Clear and unmistakable right, that is a right in esse. Material and substantial invasion of the right. Third, urgent need for the writ to prevent irreparable injury. And fourth, there is no other ordinary, speedy, and adequate remedy. Okay, so in this case, the Supreme Court found that all the requisites are present. First, as successors in interest of Ganaban, the beneficiary and grantee of a parcel of land awarded by the state. Three, the respondents would have suffered irreparable injury if the implementation of the DENR decision was not enjoined by the trial court. How? Because if after adjudication, it turns out that these portions truly form part of the lot already awarded to Romula, it would then be too late as the lot belonging to her would have already been conveyed and titled in favor of individual applicants. Fourth, there is no other speedy, ordinary, and adequate remedy to prevent the irreparable injury. So, because we have here application for free patent already issued to one, okay, there is a double issuance of patents. Okay, so he filed an injunction suit to prevent the other grantee from titling the said lot to his name. So the Supreme Court found that the injunction was proper. Ahambing versus Espinosa. So in this case, Brigida and Victor entered into an extrajudicial partition of real estate. Not being included in the partition, the petitioner filed a complaint against the respondent for the annulment of the said extrajudicial partition of real property. Victor also filed an application for the issuance of a preliminary injunction, alleging that the latter violated the status quo ante order by allowing her sons to occupy the space rented by Janelle's pharmacy, which is one of respondent Victor's tenants. Okay? The very foundation of the jurisdiction to issue a writ of injunction is the existence of a cause of action and the probability of irreparable injury, inadequacy of pecuniary estimation, and the prevention of multiplicity of suits. The grant or denial of the writ in a pending case rests in the sound discretion of the court, taking cognizance of the case since the assessment and evaluation of evidence towards that end involve findings of facts left to the said court for conclusive determination. Hence, the exercise of the judicial discretion by a court in injunctive matters must not be interfered with except when there is grave abuse of discretion. The Supreme Court found that the elements are all present in this case. The respondent court correctly found that Victor had established a clear and unmistakable right to a commercial space which was occupied by a pharmacy. He had an existing contract of lease with the pharmacy. As such, pursuant to the status quo order, it is Victor who must continue to deal with Janelle's pharmacy. The commercial space occupied by Janelle must be deemed to be under the possession and control of Victor as of the time of the issuance of the status quo order. The right of possession and control is a clear right already established by the circumstances. Hence, petitioner's act of entering the premises of the pharmacy through her sons is a material and substantial violation of Victor's right, which must be enjoined. Great and irreparable injury would result to the defendant not just because he would be deprived of his right to collect rent, but more importantly because it would make doing business with him risky, unstable, and unsound, especially with respect to his other tenants having existing contracts with him. Now, how do you dissolve an injunction? An injunction being a mere provisional remedy is subject to quashal or dissolution. Okay? The application for injunction or restraining order may be denied on the following, or if granted, it may be dissolved upon affidavits, which may be opposed by the applicant also by affidavits. Now, what would you allege in the affidavit? You allege in the affidavit that not all the requirements for the issuance of an injunction are present. You attack the right of the applicant, that it is not clear and unmistakable. You attack also that there is no grave and irreparable injury that would be caused to him. Okay? And you also file a bond, a counter bond, okay, in favor of the applicant, that if there are damages that would result from the dissolution of the injunction, that bond will answer for all of them. Okay? That the issuance or continuance thereof would cause irreparable damage to the person, while the applicant can be fully compensated for such damages. And he files a bond condition that it will answer all the damages. Nietzsche versus Equitable PCI Bank. A petition for preliminary injunction is an equitable remedy, and the one who comes to claim for equity must do so with clean hands. It is to be resorted to by a litigant to prevent or preserve a right or interest where there is a We now go to the case of Nietzsche versus Equitable PCI Bank. So, in this case, the Supreme Court stated that a petition for preliminary injunction is an equitable remedy, and one who comes to claim for equity must do so with clean hands. It is to be resorted to prevent or preserve a right or interest where there is a pressing necessity to avoid injurious consequences, which cannot be remedied under any standard of compensation. So, if the injury can be compensated, then the standard that is required for the issuance of an injunction is not present. So the injury must be of such character that it cannot be remedied under any standard of compensation. Where a plaintiff's right is doubtful or disputed, a preliminary injunction is not proper. So it will only issue in case there is a clear and unmistakable legal right. The possibility of irreparable damage without proof of an actual existing right is not a ground for preliminary injunction. To establish the requisites for injunction, the evidence to be submitted need not be conclusive and complete. The plaintiffs are only required to show that they have an ostensible right to the final relief. A writ of preliminary injunction is generally based solely on initial or incomplete evidence. Such evidence need only be a sampling intended merely to give the court an evidence of justification pending the decision on the merits of the case. So, Only a summary hearing where the sampling of evidence would be received to justify the issuance of an injunction. We agree with the respondent's contention as creditor mortgagee. It has the right under the real estate mortgage to foreclose extrajudicially the real estate mortgage and sell the property at public auction. Considering that petitioners had failed to pay their loans, if respondent bank extrajudicially forecloses and has petitioner's property sold at public auction for an amount in excess of the balance of their loan, petitioner's contractual and substantial rights under the mortgage would be violated. In such a case, the extrajudicial foreclosure may be enjoined through a writ of preliminary injunction. It was the burden of the petitioners to adduce preponderant evidence to prove their claim that respondent was the debtor of petitioner Nietzsche relative to her dollar deposit and later transferred to PCI, a subsidiary of responding bank. However, petitioner failed to discharge this obligation. BPI versus Hontanosas. The issuance of in the case of BPI, these questions the issuance of a writ of preliminary injunction relative to the foreclosure of mortgages. The Supreme Court discussed the requisites for the issuance of an injunction. The issuance of an injunction upon the application of respondents was improper. They had admittedly constituted the real estate and chattel mortgages to secure the performance of their loan, and as such, they were fully aware of the consequences on their rights in the properties given as collateral should the loan be unpaid. To be entitled to the writ of preliminary injunction, the private respondent needs only to show that it has the ostensible right to the final relief prayed for. It is also basic that the power to issue the writ of injunction is to be exercised only where the reason and the necessity are clearly established and only in cases reasonably free from doubt. So they were saying that if the foreclosure of the mortgage would proceed, then they would suffer irreparable damage in the sense that they will face prosecution for bouncing checks under BP 22. Their credit standing would be affected, etc. However, the Supreme Court said that it is not the grave and irreparable damage, and they have no ostensible clear legal right to speak of. As an ancillary and preventive remedy, it may be resorted to by a party to protect or preserve his rights during the pendency of the principal action. Such relief will accordingly protect the ability of the court to render a meaningful decision. But the respondents failed to establish the irreparable injury they would suffer should the writ of preliminary injunction not be issued. The principally feared the loss of their possession and ownership of the mortgage properties and face the possibility of criminal prosecution for the post-dated checks. But such fear of potential loss of possession and ownership or facing criminal prosecution did not constitute the required irreparable injury. The respondents will not be deprived outrightly of their property given the right of redemption granted to them. Also, in extrajudicial foreclosures, they have the right to receive any surplus in the selling price. So, the Supreme Court reminded that an injunction should not be granted lightly or precipitately because it is a limitation upon the freedom of the defendant's action. It should be granted only when the court is fully satisfied that the law permits it and the emergency demands it. For no power exists whose exercise is more delicate, which requires greater caution, or is more dangerous in a doubtful case than the issuance of an injunction. We now proceed to the case of Caneland Sugar versus Alon. So in this case, Caneland filed with the RTC a complaint for damages with application for injunction to restrain Land Bank from proceeding with the auction sale of the petitioner's property. So the issue is whether the Court of Appeals erred in finding that the trial court did not commit grave abuse in not enjoining the extrajudicial foreclosure of the property subject of this case. The court finds that the petition should be denied for the sole reason that the act sought to be enjoined is already an accomplished act. So, if the subject of the injunction is already a consummated act, injunction will not lie. Injunction would not lie where the act sought to be enjoined have already become fait accompli or an accomplished or consummated act. Why? Because the purpose of injunction would not be served. The purpose of an injunction is to preserve the status quo until the merits of the case can be heard. Any declaration upholding the propriety of the writ would be entirely useless, as there will be no actual case or controversy between the parties insofar as the preliminary injunction is concerned. Records show that the foreclosure sale, which petitioners sought to be enjoined, has already been carried out, and in fact, a certificate of sale was issued to the respondent. There is therefore no more actual case or controversy between the parties insofar as the RTC's refusal to enjoin the sale is concerned. Injunction is not a cause of action in itself, but merely a provisional remedy, an adjunct to a main suit. When the act sought to be enjoined had become an accomplished fact, only the prayer for provisional remedy should be denied. However, the trial court should still proceed with the determination of the principal action so that an adjudication of the rights of the parties can be had. Next case is Kabili versus Balindong. A case where an execution order has been considered as still pending so that all the proceedings of the execution are still proceedings in the suit. A court which issued a writ of execution has the inherent power to correct errors of its ministerial officers and to control its own processes. The remedy, however, is not the resort to another co-equal body, but to a higher court with authority to nullify the action of the issuing court. So an injunction cannot be issued to restrain the enforcement of a decision of another co-equal court. So in this case, the respondent judge clearly ignored the principle of judicial stability by issuing a TRO to temporarily restrain the sheriff from enforcing the writ of execution issued by a co-equal court. The respondent judge was aware that he was acting on matters pertaining to the execution phase of a final decision of a co-equal and a coordinate court. The judge should have refrained from acting on the petition because the RTC, which rendered the decision, retains jurisdiction to rule on any question on the enforcement of the writ of execution. That the respondent judge subsequently rectified his error by eventually dismissing the petition before him for lack of jurisdiction is not a defense that he can use. So an injunction will not lie to restrain the enforcement of the judgment of a co-equal court. Next case is Fermin versus Estevez. The issue is whether the special order of demolition may be enforced against the petitioners. The generally accepted principle is that no man shall be affected by any proceeding to which he is a stranger, and strangers to a case are not bound by a judgment rendered by the court. Due process requires that a court decision can only bind a party to the litigation and not against one who did not have his day in court. So in this case, petitioners were not parties in the civil case. Petitioner's allegation that their possession did not arise from an agreement with the defendants or the predecessors in interest of the defendants remain unrebutted. When the Court of Appeals referred to the remedy of terceria, it must be referring to Section 16, Rule 39, and not Section 43, Rule 39. The remedy of terceria is available to a third person other than the parties to the case who claims on a property levied on. In this case, the property was not levied on and put on auction. The implementation of the special order demolition would result in the destruction of petitioner's property. Further, terceria is not a speedy and adequate remedy insofar as petitioners are concerned. Since petitioners are not parties to the civil case, respondent has to file the proper action to enforce his property rights within the bounds of the law and our rules. Petitioner's right to possession, if any, should be threshed out in the proper court proceeding. Okay, there are certain acts which cannot be restrained by injunction, contained in various statutes. Like, for example, the implementation of the national government infrastructure projects under PD 1818, the seizure and forfeiture proceedings under the jurisdiction of the Bureau of Customs, the injunction against any person or entity on the acquisition or clearance for the development of right-of-way for national government projects under RA 8975, the bidding or awarding of contracts or projects of the national government, commencement, prosecution, execution, implementation, operation of any such contract or project, termination or rescission of such contract or project, undertaking or authorization or any other lawful activity necessary for such contract or project. Remember that RA 8975 applies only to government infrastructure projects. Another prohibited injunction are cases involving concessions, licenses, and other permits issued by public officials for the exploitation of natural resources against the Presidential Agrarian Reform Council or those connected with the implementation of the CARP, against asset privatization trust of the Department of Finance. We now go to the case of Peñalosa versus Rivera. It is also prohibited to issue temporary restraining order or injunction against any case involving or growing out of labor disputes, where the writ of execution issued by the said commission is sought to be enforced upon property of a stranger to a labor dispute, even upon a mere prima facie showing of such ownership of such claimant. A separate action for injunctive relief against such levy may be maintained in court, since said action neither involves nor grows out of a labor dispute because of a terceria. That property is not owned by the defendant in the labor dispute. Sunrise Corporation versus CA. Again, this speaks of one of the limitations on the issuance of injunction, because injunction will not lie with respect to the implementation of national government infrastructure projects. For the local government infrastructure projects, RTCs may issue provisional injunctive reliefs provided that the following requisites are present. There are compelling and substantial constitutional violations. There is a clear right in esse. There is a need to prevent grave and irreparable injuries. There is demonstrable urgency for the issuance of the injunctive relief. When there is public interest at stake or in enjoining the project while the action is pending that far outweigh the inconvenience or cost to the party, the public benefits that will result from the completion of the project. Okay, this is the final case. This case again speaks of right in esse, clear, unmistakable right. Bicol Medical Center versus Botor. Okay. The Camarines Sur provincial government donated a parcel of land to the Ministry of Health. And on that parcel of land, it stood the Bicol Medical Center and Road Lot 3. Okay. Now, the BMC constructed a steel gate along the said land to control the flow of vehicle. Now, Mayor Bongat filed an application for a writ of injunction against BMC. Now, the issue is whether or not the Court of Appeals erred in directing the RTC to issue a writ of preliminary injunction on the closure of the road. Again, the Supreme Court reiterated the requisites for the issuance of an injunction, clear and unmistakable right, material and substantial invasion of said right, urgent need for the writ to prevent irreparable injury, and there is no other plain, speedy, and adequate remedy. The Supreme Court said that the existence of a right in esse is absent in this case. Respondents failed to establish proof of their clear legal right to utilize the road. Instead of merely relying on the tax map and claims of customary use, Naga City should have presented a clear legal right to support their claim. The Department of Health's ownership over road lot 3 with the concomitant with the right to use and enjoy the property must be respected because they have a title to the said property. On the other hand, the claim of the local government is mere customary use, and customary use is not one of the sources of legal obligation. Hence, it does not ripen into a right. So that's it for preliminary injunction. Thank you for listening.